Hi, everyone. I don't know if it's good morning or good evening for you, but I'm Kristen Doty, and I work for Catalyst Learning Curricula. I'm an educational trainer for professional development, and I also am, I guide schools in curriculum development and curriculum creation. And tonight we are going to be working with a specific topic, and that is the topic of IAs and helping students. Oops, I think I'm need a moment to share correctly. We are going to be using a tool that I found to be indispensable for IAs, and that is Data Classroom. If you're not familiar with Data Classroom, it is it's a tool for gathering data, organizing it, displaying it, both in chart form and graphic form, as well as a data analysis tool that's used for calculating different statistical descriptors and statistical hypothesis tests. So if it's unfamiliar to you, you're going to get a tour of that tonight, because that's the thing that I have found has propelled IA scores forward for my students and given them a greater advantage, not necessarily in a way that's unfair. It's simply in the way that they have the ability to analyze their data much more readily, and therefore they have a better understanding of what they are doing in their experiments. So that's where I've seen the greatest growth for my students. And if you haven't used Data Classroom before, I want to invite you to go to dataclassroom.com and sign up for a free trial right now so that you can use the tool while we're in the workshop. Erin Reedy is here tonight. Erin, if you want to wave. Erin is a teacher, a high school teacher as well, and has created this company that allows students to move around through data sets in a way that's much more intuitive and with low risk. Not a huge time commitment for students to make graphs or to change graphs or to do something to visualize their data. And he has done this because of the need himself for his own students to have something that was more versatile and more accessible, for instance, than some of the graphing programs that we've been leaning on in the past, like Excel. And so if you have any questions for Erin tonight, anything technical, I'm going to defer to Erin. Know that you can call on him at any point, as I will. So anything else you want to say, Erin, just before we get started about that?
No, just I had to chuckle a little bit when you were sort of talking about how Data Classroom has helped on the IA, and you said something like not in a way that is not unfair, because I have had several people say, is this cheating on the IA, because this is helping my students so much. Are you sure that this is legal? And I assure you that using statistical software to make graphs and do statistics is okay on the IA, but it can often be very, very helpful.
Yeah, I've had that question too, because I teach IB seminars for the International Baccalaureate, and I've had biology and ESS teachers ask me exactly the same thing. So, but it's one of those tools that if you don't already know about it and you're not already using it, know that there's other kids who are using it in their classrooms. And so there's that advantage, right? Okay, so why is it a useful tool? I want to talk about that for just a few minutes, and then I want to get into using this yourself so that you feel you have some sort of fluency and can turn around and use this with your students if it is taking you in the direction that is perfect for the next steps. So in this case, what I have on the screen is the percentage weights of the IA. If you're not an International Baccalaureate teacher, the IA is an abbreviation for internal assessment, and the IB loves its acronyms. This is just one of the many acronyms that the IB uses. And the internal assessment is essentially, in most cases for the sciences, it is often a laboratory experiment report, so a lab report or a field report. It sometimes can also be a survey report for environmental systems and societies, or it could be other permutations like simulation data and that sort of thing, or secondary data. But for the most part, the group 4 subjects or the sciences in the International Baccalaureate program depend very heavily on the students being able to independently design a research project, carry it out, and analyze their data, draw conclusions, and present that information to an outside party. And the percentage weight of that particular IA, that paper, is 20% in most categories of science, and it is 25% for the environmental systems and societies class. And you might notice that these weights have toggled a little bit during COVID, and that is true for some schools. You have different weights depending on what your school has opted in or out of during COVID. And also, we don't have necessarily paper 3 in this weight system, depending on which year the students are testing. So know that these percentages have actually gone up for some of our different courses, but they might come back to what is expected at some point, hopefully. But for the students to do poorly in the internal assessment, you can see that the work that they perform in the other aspects of your class might really be brought down if they cannot express themselves and communicate the concepts around science, the information and analysis of data. That becomes a huge part of them being able to score well for IB. And specifically, what parts of scoring and how exactly does that look? Well, this is the breakdown of the internal assessment grading for IB. And this is for the biology, chemistry, and physics classes, not for ESS. And you can see that in this point system, the majority of the points are going to be in your data analysis. And so you see that the core of what we're talking about here is in the analysis category. And the analysis category is really where I see the greatest impact of a useful tool. My students, when they don't have the background knowledge of how to present their data, when they cannot organize it themselves, they do not see trends, they cannot discern relationships, then they do not have those presentation points in the analysis section, because they are not seeing what has happened. The second place where the students will excel with a superior program is going to be in the evaluation section. Now, some of the evaluation section is dependent on how they relate back to the concepts of the introduction and contextualize what they have done. So they're not as direct, but it's an indirect earning of points in this second section. You'll see with environmental systems and societies, again, the weight distribution is heavier in the places where the students are dealing with their data. Again, this section here is a significant portion of the analysis, what they collect, how they present it, and what they see in their data collection, and then how they discuss it and evaluate it, how do they apply it. That is also really important. So these are the two sections for ESS that we'll see an improvement in scores with better data analysis. When you look at the rubrics of the internal assessment, the rubric focuses very heavily on the degree to which students understand what happens and can predictively state the significance of their results. Where there flaws, where there errors, or their uncertainty, are there ways that they can project the data and to what strength. And so during, if you read through the wording in this, you'll see that a lot of the different pieces that are expected come back to sufficient and relative quantitative and qualitative data. So how much they are focusing on the amount they use. Again, this is not the tool. So data classroom has no part of that. That's about procedure. But then what do they do with it when they begin to analyze what they have collected? So you want to make sure that they're looking at these classic pieces of the impact of uncertainty, that they're bringing in these parts about valid and detailed conclusions. These different aspects of data processing and data analysis are the key components of the points in this section. It would be impossible to get a high score if the students do not have good presentation analysis of a sufficient data set. True too for the evaluation section. When we looked at this section, we're looking at the evaluation. This is kind of secondary, it's indirect. If the students don't do a good job in the analysis, it's harder for them to earn the points in the evaluation because this is the more complex thinking. So in this, we see the higher order thinking of description and justification. And that's where we want to say, how do we justify conclusions that are drawn? What is the evidence for that? And the evidence typically in science is going to be numeric. So we want to come back to that numeric evidence and try to gain those points. So strengths and weaknesses, again, context, these are all going to be places where the students can earn points. And when you go over these rubrics, it's undeniable that the students need tools to work with data that will not fail them. And so that's where I see the biggest jump. For environmental systems and societies, again, we see that same emphasis on are they able to juggle the data they've collected in graphs and charts, and can they analyze it? Do they present it and interpret it well with patterns and relationships? So again, we're right back to data analysis here. So when we have something that's an ongoing problem, like students just not having the data analysis skills or the proficiency in mathematics in our classes, that means that that's left to us to teach. And the teaching of this type of analysis first undeniably needs to happen earlier in the school year before the students are working on their IAs, because by a definition of the College Board, I'm sorry, of the International Baccalaureate, the students should be working on their IAs independently. You are someone that they can consult with in a general way, but their decision-making about how to proceed is wholly on their shoulders or in a peer context, peer review style of learning. And so that experience needs to come prior to they're facing the problem of their own data set, right? And their data sets are very specific to whatever question they've researched. So by the time that they're doing their independent project, and emphasize on the independent part of the project, they should also be able to make decisions about how to manipulate data. Now, that is a pretty tough thing to do nowadays because our students, we are trying to catch up with all types of skills, and math skills and data analysis skills are definitely low on the totem pole there. So how do we deal with that? One of the things that I found is that I want my students to have an interface with a program that they can navigate themselves, that they feel comfortable with, and that they will know if they get into a bind, they're not making mistakes that are devastating. They don't lose their data set. They don't, they're not going in a direction that leads them astray down the wormhole in the wrong direction. And so I really like that Data Classroom has an interface that is easy to navigate, that's intuitive, but it also has embedded tutorials. And so I'll show you a few of those on the way, because I'm finding that my students have to have some independent learning time, and they also need the support and the structure inside that scaffolded already, because there's going to be so many different things I can't help them work through just by time alone, but also that my hands are tied as an IB teacher to allow them to make those mistakes by themselves, right? So having a program where they're less likely to get into trouble and they're more likely to be able to take risks without a disadvantage is very, very helpful. Okay, so coming back to the direct and the indirect, how do we get those points? How do we actually improve the score? Well, I'm looking at somewhere between 6 and 12 points for every IA. If I can help my students improve the way that they organize their data, present it, and analyze it, then I know that I can get them through more of these points that they simply are losing because they just don't have the ability to communicate well what it is they do and don't understand about the work they've done. So, so getting back to those points, thinking about the analysis and evaluation points in particular, those are the most direct reference to those points. But the indirect that I suggested earlier is that deeper understanding. If my students have a strong sense of what happened, and then they can talk about why it happened. What is the explanation, or what is eliminated out of the possibilities of the explanation? And that is really the step that my students need, is to pull that deeper knowledge. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to get to these first analysis points, kind of the easy to grab points, and then get through some of the evaluation points of taking it up a notch where there's an opportunity. So any questions about just that in general, of how we might look at the scoring of the IA and where we want to target improvement on the scores? Notice I haven't talked much about communication or the earlier parts of the IA, typically the personal engagement and exploration, laying that groundwork about the experiment. I'm really talking about the numbers here. Okay, if there are no questions, then what I want to do is I want to give you a chance to play around with the data set. So this slideshow, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to put this slideshow in the chat so that you can access the slideshow and use the clickable links that are in the slideshow. So if you just open that slideshow, I'll also put the clickable links as we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to create a data set with me so that we can play with that data set. And I'm sure you had this experience before, that when you give students, I'm sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
Do you have the sharing settings open on that slideshow? I was not able to get in there.
That's a good question, and thank you for asking that.
I've done that more
Nope,
times than I
I
can.
don't. Yep, I know. I opened the other ones, but not this one.
You can ignore that request for access from me.
Okay, great.
Oh, oops, she's right there. Sorry.
Okay, you can refresh this
Now it's
link.
working.
Okay, sorry about that. You know, you open 6 of the sharings and then leave 1. Okay, so now you have access to all of the slides in the viewer capacity. But so if you want to go back to any of those, you know, you have the ability to go back to those things. But what I want you to do is I want you to click on slide number 14. I'm sorry, slide number 10. And there's a link in there to a spreadsheet. And in the spreadsheet, you have heart rate data. Okay, I'm going to put the link to the spreadsheet separately in the chat so that you can go straight to that spreadsheet if you prefer. I know I have one screen myself, and so getting all the things open on one screen is always a little bit of a push. And I can see all kinds of anonymous animals jumping into the spreadsheet, so it must have worked well. Okay, go ahead with the question, Georgina.
So when you have students working with, say, an exercise just like the one you're presenting with the heart rate, I've heard so many different opinions on how many subjects should they have, and then how many times should they do that, and if they do it again, should they have different subjects for their second, third, and fourth trial?
That's really a great question. So generally, you can never have enough data, right? That's where we're going. That's the answer in the bigger picture. But generally, the way that I try to guide students is that when you're using a reagent from a bottle, you know, something that comes out of a chemical grade reagent bottle, that, you know, a particular that you've whipped up into a certain molarity, you don't need as many repeat trials. You can have repeat trials, but at a certain point, it's just using up your chemicals for no reason. Okay. But if you throw something into that is not controlled, such as a standard reagent, something, let's say, that has some variability to it, samples or chemicals taken from the environment that are not chemical grade or reagent grade, then you need a higher sample size. You need more trials. Okay. If you start to throw an organism in there, like yeast or seeds, then you're going to absolutely need to, again, up your sample size to a larger sample size. And if you bring in an organism that is more complex or is older in its development, so instead of seeds, you're using little saplings, then those organisms have more variability and they're bringing more uncontrolled variables to the equation. So again, you need to up your sample size even more. So I try to help my students think of it as a continuum. There's no one right answer of what's the largest sample size or what's the sample size we're aiming for, or how many repeat trials. And so think about the more uncontrolled variables you have, the larger your sample size has to be in order to diminish or reduce the effect of the uncontrolled variables, such as like genetics or environmental factors and so on. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, and people have talked about like the 5 by 5 problem. There's that little like, oh, should we do 5 this and 5 of that? We've talked about that a little bit. Aaron and I go over this topic, but generally you're looking at having 5 variations of your independent variable. So if you're varying temperature, you might have 5 different temperatures, and so on. So
Yeah,
think about the ways that we do that. Go ahead, Aaron.
I have a little bit of commentary on this, and this is, there's what you might be looking for, that kind of 5 by 5 as an IB teacher, but as someone who made my living as a researcher for about a decade, my personal rule of thumb, just scientifically, would be you should not add another treatment group until you have a minimum of 20 test subjects. And this is coming from my lens as an evolutionary biologist. So I think if you could only take 40 data points, you should probably only have one treatment. But your students aren't necessarily producing something for publication in the scientific literature. So if you I just want to point this out because I think it's interesting that I would never necessarily recommend someone do 5 different treatment groups unless they could have at least at a minimum 100 test subjects, because that would be 5 times 20. But that if you are experienced looking at what IB graders are looking at, and if they said, oh, you only had 3 levels of this treatment, you should add more, then that's a different thing. And obviously you should coach your students to do as well as they can on that rubric. But just know at least somewhere that, like, by sort of the standards of professional science, you wouldn't necessarily want to do that. I don't know, maybe that was not even a helpful comment, but I couldn't help myself, Kristen.
No, I feel the same. And that is really, Georgina, you bring up a problem that is, that you can lose points like that just because your students haven't adequately, they don't have an adequate number of repetitions of trials within a certain group, or they don't have enough variation. And that is one of the easiest ways that you see scores getting knocked down, right? And so for that reason, then you need to up these sample sizes, up the number of tubes you're putting, up the number of seeds you're using, up the number of, whatever it is that you're messing with. And you can see that really quickly, the students have an enormous amount of data. And when they have an enormous amount of data, it's much harder to see the trend. And so what do we do about that problem? We have to have some sort of way to manage the data we're working with. And so you have to teach them organization, data organization. It's the precursor to data analysis, right? My students also get really bogged down. Like, what do I graph? I have so much information now. What do I graph, right? And so I want to show you a few tricks. The data set that I gave you on heart rate, I want to collect data first because I want you to have a personal experience with the data. It's so much easier to work with data where you have a personal relationship with the data that are collected. And I'm going to have a data set later that you're not collecting data, and you'll notice it's much harder to deal with. So what I want you to do first is I want you to, I want to give each of you a letter, a student number to work with in this data set. You'll notice that this data set has student number, student letters A through N. Okay, so anybody who's willing to do the heart rate data, I'm just going to assume you're all willing because you're here tonight. If I was student D, let's say, then I would put my heart rate data here into the space for the first trial when we do trial number 1. So I'm going to ask you all to do trial number 1, trial number 2. So, and then when I get to trial number 2, I will come down to student D and I would put my information here in trial number 2 for student D. And I would just keep looking for student D. Okay. If that was my designation. So I'm going to give each of you a student letter as long as you, as long as you're willing. So turn your camera on, put your hand up, put your thumb up, whatever, and I will give you a student letter. Okay. So I'm going to go across my screen. And if you don't want to participate for some reason, just be like, I'm out. Okay. Georgina, you're going to be A. James, you're B. Susan, you're C. I should mention, I'm not going to remember this. Angela, you're D. Julie, Amber, you're E. Dassy, you're F. Wendy, you're G. Alyssa, you're in. Okay. Alyssa, you're H. Anybody else willing to take their data? Nancy, you are I. Anybody else willing? Barbara, you are J. Jocelyn, you're in. Jocelyn, you're K. Anybody else? Aaron, you are L. I have 2 more. Anybody else want to do this who didn't get a letter? Okay, so we'll take the data, we'll take data for our heart rate. So if you go to your, put your 2 fingers, your first 2 fingers on your pulse and your neck, or you can use your radial pulse just below your wrist bone. And I'm going to ask you to count your number of heartbeats. When I say go, you're going to start. And then when I say stop, you're going to stop. And then you're going to multiply that by 4, because we're only going to take our heart rate for 15 seconds. Okay. So everybody have their finger on their pulse. All right. Ready, set, begin. Stop, multiply that number by 4 and add that to the spreadsheet across from trial 1 with your student letter. When you have finished doing that, slide on down to trial 2 with the same student letter and get ready to go again. We're going to take trial 2. All right, trial 2. On your mark, get set, count. Stop, multiply by 4, add your number to the data sheet. Get ready for trial 3. On your mark, get set, begin. Stop, multiply by 4, add that to trial 3 across from your letter. Set yourself up for trial 4. All right. Go ahead and get yourself set up. On your mark, get set, count. Stop, multiply by 4, add your data. Get ready for the final trial. I think that's the final trial. On your mark, get set, count. Stop, multiply by 4, and put your last trial 5 in. So this is our preliminary data. We were looking at resting heart rate. And again, we did 5 trials, Georgina, just to make sure that we didn't have a single measurement and expect that to be enough to describe us. And so each of the students A through N have 5 trials of resting heart rate. And now we're going to do some sort of treatment. Our treatment in this case is going to be 1 minute of deep breathing and relaxation. We're going to lose Amber because she's done for the day anyway. She's already yawning. Okay, so what we're going to do, I want you to either, if you're more comfortable, you can shut your screen off. We're going to take 60 seconds with silence, eyes shut, and I want you to take long breaths in and then long breaths out for 60 seconds. So deep relaxation breathing. Leave your audio on, and we're going to begin now. And without too much disturbance, set yourself up to, again, calculate your heart rate by putting your fingers on your pulse and begin to count when I tell you to start. Begin now. Stop. Multiply that number by 4 and add it to after relaxation, trial 1 across from your letter. Set yourself up for trial 2, and we're only going to do 2 trials on this second set just for time's sake. When you're ready, put your hand on your pulse and please begin counting now. Stop, multiply by 4, and add it to the data. All right, if you want to turn your camera back on, we're gonna rejoin. And if you'd like, you can throw some fake data into the other lines of trial 3, 4, and 5 for relaxation, just to fill this data set in. Feel free to throw some numbers in there that are similar to what you were getting in your trial 1 and 2, or some variations. That'll just give us a data set to play with. I wanted you to have some sort of relationship with this data so that it makes more sense, because I want to be able to graph it. And it definitely helps for your students if you do the same thing. Make sure that they have some understanding of what their data means before they start graphing it. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to have you add this data set to Data Classroom. And to do that, I'm going to show you how to add the data set to Data Classroom, and then ask you to do the same as you have a chance to follow along. Okay, so if you have 2 screens, great. Otherwise, I'll give you a moment after I'm finished so that you can do the same thing. So I'm at the Data Classroom website and I have logged in, and you can see that on my dashboard, I already have some data sets here that I can use, but I also have the option to add a data set. But I have to get you guys out of the way because you're in the way of that button. Okay, so I have the option to import a data set down here on the bottom. So I'm going to go to that import data button, and it's going to ask me, where should I bring the data? Where should I go to get the data? And it allows me to upload, create, or fetch. So I can just create a data set right here. I can open a thing and punch all these numbers in by hand, which would be really tedious. So I'm not going to do that. I could actually upload them from Excel or from another spreadsheet. But because we have all of the data in a spreadsheet on Google Sheets, I'm just going to copy the URL up in the address bar up here. And I'm going to go to Data Classroom and tell it to fetch a spreadsheet from Google Drive, because that's in my Google Drive. It's in your Google Drive now too. So when I press fetch, it opens up a place to put the URL. So I'm going to just copy and paste that into the URL, and I'm going to tell it to fetch. Now, if I have not given permission for Data Classroom to use my drive, then I will go ahead and go through the process of getting permission. And so you'll have to do the same thing in that case. And then once I have it, once I have permission and I'm importing that data sheet, I'm going to give it some sort of name here so that it's saved. So I'm just going to give it the date and my initials so that I can find it later. And now it's going to be loaded in Data Classroom. Okay, so it says it's been a success, and I can say that I'm finished. Now, before the pop-up window is closed, they're going to ask me, they're going to check to make sure my data is understandable so that it's compatible to loading to Data Classroom. And if it's not, they're going to help me figure out how to make it compatible. So, so everything looks good on mine. And if you need to fix it, you can fix it. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to have you try the same at your Data Classroom portal. Now, if you don't have a Data Classroom account, just go to Data Classroom and sign up for a free trial. It gives you 90 days to play in Data Classroom. So you can do that and have access so that you can fool around with this tonight. Feel free to ask any questions if you get stuck. And I'm going to share this data set in the chat, because I think a couple of people came in while we were messing around with that data set. So that's in the chat now.
Kristen, when we have put the link into Data Classroom, is it a living document? If we go back and alter the Google Sheet, will it continue to change in Data Classroom?
It didn't used to. Aaron, I'm going to defer to you. Is it still document? Is it still updating from that, or do you retouch?
Yeah, it's not quite a living document. It won't update automatically. But if you go to the what I call the hamburger menu on the left, it's little 3 bars in the upper left when you're looking at a data set, and you click that, there will be an option to reload. If you click that reload button, it'll just refresh with the most recent version of the sheet.
Okay, thanks.
And Kristen, if you, next time you screen share, if you want to show where that is.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And someone asked, Barbara asked about what format we use. If you notice the format I used for our heart rate data, that's called tidy data format, where it communicates exactly what each piece of data, what category it should go into. And we can talk a little bit after the session about tidy data. If people are interested in like, how do you make it so that it's as clean as possible? You can also clean it up as you go. And like I said at the beginning, you can create that data set simply by opening a blank data set and adding that, right? So I'm going to show you that those parts, because when you import data, you're going to get all of these columns of data, and you could have opened this as just blanks where you add columns on this left-hand side. You could add and delete rows and columns by using this tool right here. Okay, so on this left side, it allows me to add rows at different locations, or add columns at different locations, or add 3 or 4 columns at a time if I want to. So I can keep adding information and altering this data set, or I could construct this data set from scratch using just a blank form where I'm inputting the data directly here with my students if I'd like. So if you feel a little bit that it's tricky to upload information. And Aaron, you wanted me to show where there was the refresh on the data set. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and I'm not sure if I know where that is.
So that is the little hamburger menu.
Oh, right. Got it.
Yep.
I had to think about that. Reload right here.
Yep, that's
Okay, so the reload button is over here on that left menu bar. Okay. And so if you've updated your spreadsheet over here, then you want to go ahead and do a reload on that data set when you come back to Data Classroom. Okay, so a few things. When you bring in your data set, you have the ability to, like I said, add columns or rows, or if I go down here and I realize there are gaps in my data that I haven't, that, you know, student M and N, that was me. I was pretending to be student M and N. I don't have the data input. I can just go ahead and input that information by hand now that I'm here, and add information as needed so that we've got the missing data complete, and we can work through that problem. It doesn't hold us up. Okay, so it's not going to get caught on missing data. We can go without it, or I can do that as I need right here. The other things that you see on this interface have plenty of help for you. Like I said, the thing that I like about Data Classroom is I don't have to spend time teaching this to most of my students because they're not afraid to push all the buttons. And pushing all the buttons is exactly how they're going to navigate this. If they have problems with importing their data, they can press the data import button and it will take them through all of the checklist of what's getting caught. If something isn't importing cleanly, they can just go through the tutorial of that. If they need to prepare their data in a certain way, this will take them through it, explaining what are the steps that they need to do to fix it. And so I can either have the wizard help me, or I can ignore it, or I can fix it myself. Okay. So in this case, they're telling me to look at these different column headers and determine what the type is. You can see I've got a yellow exclamation point here telling me, bring your attention here, you have to fix this. So our first column, treatment, I push the menu choices down here, and I'll find that I can use categorical treatment. So in our situation, we did have categories. We had prior to our deep relaxed breathing and after our relaxation breathing. So those are 2 different categories. This is not numeric data. There's no numbers in this column, and this is not my sample count. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and it's also not descriptive information. So I'm going to choose categorical. Most of these columns are going to be either categorical or numeric when they're imported from a data set. My trial number is, although it's numbers, it's not numeric data because it's really just about collecting more than one piece of information from the same person. So this is actually categorical data of trials. And the subject, again, you can tell without having numbers, this must be categorical data, where my heart rate information is going to be numeric data. Okay, and the exclamation points pointing out you do have some missing information here. So it's going to bring my attention to the parts of my data set that are lacking. All right, any questions about the import? I know that there's some chats going on that I think Aaron's fielding most of those chat questions. So I'm going to ignore that. All right, so when we want to move on from our data set, we can use the data set as a way to print or give our students a visual of it. But we want to, the key features I want to look at, I can always print my data from this window as well. What I really want to look at is graphing and statistical analysis. And so if I press the graph button, or if I go to this graph button, I can toggle between two screens. This table is shown on my table button and the graphs are in my graph button up here. So this is just taking me between my two screens. I can also, when I'm in this data chart, I can also get help making graphs using this graph wizard, which I'll show you a little bit more later. But I want to first just move over to the graph screen and play around with the graphs. So in the graph screen, you can see I have lots of different choices. I have my categories and my numeric data up here, but I don't have a graph yet. So I need to pull some of this information down. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show my treatment on my choices, and my treatment showed up here as well as over here. And my treatment is going to be my information on my x-axis, very likely. Then I can also show my trial number. I can show my subjects, and I can also show the heart rate data. Okay, so if I'm looking at how my independent variable of the treatment impacts my dependent variable of the heart rate, then I'm probably going to put my heart rate on the Y and my treatment on the X. But this is set for the wrong chart. There's pie charts, histograms, and plots, and it's set on histograms, and there's no way to make a histogram of that. So it's going to keep me from trying to do that, which is the first thing I want my students to do, is do not make a graph that doesn't make any sense. Instead, choose graph types that make sense for the data that you're collecting, okay? So I have heart rate on my Y and my treatment on my X, and what I can see are an arrangement of the data that were collected for prior to relaxation and after relaxation. So that's a lovely way of looking at my data. I immediately have a data chart that gets me started. But being a teacher, I'm not wild about a few things on my data chart. I wanted to clean it up a little bit. So I can go to the appearance button and do all of the usual things. I want a title on my graph, so I can slide down until I find the title section and add a title in the general information here of adding a title. So this is the impact of okay, so so now I have a title. If I want to make these, if I don't like the way that these little dots are being shown, they're kind of large for me, then I can bring the dots size down by toggling the point size here. I could change the color to be something that I prefer. Maybe I want red dots so that it looks more bright. And then I also have the ability to, change my axis labels. I'm not wild about the heart rate starting at 40. And so I would prefer to see my axis labels go from 0. So I can also change those types of things if I want to change those as well. So know that you've got control of all of these different things right here on under all of these different choices in your appearance. So let's see, the y-axis, I want to include 0. So there we go. That fixed that for me. Okay. So besides doing these little things, I can move around the different ways that I look at the information. So if I wanted to add, for instance, trial number, I can add trial number and see if the rate of breathing if we became more anxious and our heart rate was changing while we were taking those trials, or we became more relaxed as we were taking our trials. So I could change that around. I could sort these out by subject. The student letters, if I want to eliminate certain things, for instance, if I go back to trial number, I can choose the values that I want to show. So I can look at my values under trial number and just compare, let's say, trial number 1 compared to trial number 5. So if I just compare those 2 trials, I can exclude the other trials and see if there's seems to be a change between trials 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That might give me a different visual of that. So I have lots of ability to change what is being shown or how the information is being shown, to include or exclude different ideas. And that gives me, that allows my students to not have to hand draw graphs over and over, in a way that might be slow them down, just the physical aspect of it, rather than in a way that allows them to move through it. The other thing I wanted to show you about adding quickly are the descriptive statistics, because they're so critical in IB sciences that students do have to get to a point where they understand that the statistical analysis should be shown on the graph. And it should be with all data, they should have descriptors. So in this case, I just checked descriptive statistics. It will go to a defaulted version of showing the standard deviation. I personally don't want to show the standard deviation. I want my students to show 2 standard errors of the mean. So I can just drop down that menu and choose standard error of the mean, 2 standard errors, or the 95% confidence interval. So maybe I'm going to choose 2 standard errors of the mean or the 95% confidence interval. And that ball is a little too big. So I'm going to go in and I can mess with the, again, whatever I want to on how it's shown. And that gives me information that is helpful to see, was there a significant difference? Do we have overlapping error bars, for instance, in this case? So I can see that they overlap. There's probably not a significant difference between these 2 treatments. If I feel like I want to find out, I can look at the values for these different groups. And the standard 2 standard error of the mean can be displayed in these charts or down here on this graph if I would like to see it on the graph. Anything that I put on the graph can be captured. So I can just press this little camera part and get this graph in a photo where I copy the image. And that allows me to bring it into a different document. So when the students are writing up their IAs, they can take, capture this picture. They can go to their IA and use that as their landing place of where they're going to put this graph. So they can go into their IA and add their graph under their results section. And if they've put a figure caption automatically into the diagram, then they're going to have a caption that's already there. If they have included a data chart of their statistics, then they can insert their statistical analysis as well. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little tiny demonstration of where the statistical analysis can be found. So when we're doing this, actually, I'm going to wait on that. I'm going to have you guys instead spend a minute catching up with me, so I don't go too far here. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I would like to give you guys a chance to play around with this by using a data set and importing it, playing with it, creating graphs for it. And you can either use the data set we just played with, or you can use a data set that's more sophisticated. Actually, I kind of would prefer if you try it with a new data set. What we're going to do is we're going to look at slide number 11 from the slide deck that I originally shared with you. And I'm going to share that in the chat one more time. That's the slide deck that I want you to go to, slide number 11. And I want you to take the last few minutes, a few minutes together as a group to import this data set and create 3 graphs. And preferably what I'd like you to do is I would like you to create graphs, 3 graphs that have that tell different parts of the story. Okay, so the data set is rich with different stories, and the whole point being able to make really fast graphs from different angles, from different perspectives, is that you can talk about the data in different ways. So this particular data set on slide number 11 is a data set on a fermentation lab where you have multiple tubes with yeast in it, and the yeast have different types of sugars in them so that they can you can see what happens when you have different sugars in a yeast solution. Okay, so that's a context. I'm going to let you guys go into breakout rooms of 3 people each. And if you can make a couple of graphs in the next couple of minutes using this data set and throw them onto your slide. The slides all have breakout room numbers. So breakout group number 1 will put their graphs on this slide, and group number 2 on this slide, and so on. So, so that's your landing place. And if you could join your breakout room and work with your mates, that'd be great.
Hey, Erin.
Hey, Angela, how's it going?
Good. This is so fun. I don't have a lot of time to play in Data Classroom, so this is really good.
Yeah, you're always working on serious projects. I'm so excited about what you're working on, though.
Yeah, it's really great. I'm excited about it. Hi, Susan. I'm Angela.
Hi, Susan. I'm Aaron.
Hi, you guys.
Does one of you want to share a screen and we can start working on the challenge she gave us?
Sure. Let's see here. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
All right, so I imported the data. I gave them all labels.
Okay.
The time, is that numeric? That would be categorical, wouldn't it?
It would. Well, I think in this case, it's one of these answers where it could be either, but I think numeric, I think your first inclination is probably right for most cases here.
Okay, Susan, are you okay? Is this your first time on Data Classroom?
I've used it before a couple of times, but not enough to really know.
Do you want to do it? Actually, do you want to share your screen instead?
Well, no, you're already there, and I got lost for a second doing something else with my children. So,
okay, so let me just show you really quick what I did.
Okay.
So she gave us her slide deck, and I just said click on this link, and it gave me this data set. I copied and pasted the URL, and I went into Data Classroom. Let's see, let's just discard and start over again. So it's there, but I'll do it again. So I imported the data. And in this case, I have my URL. So I did fetch from a Google Drive. And we're going to say version 2, perhaps. Okay, here we go. So save. Is it okay so far, Susan? Susan, are you there? Okay.
She might have stepped away. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All righty. So now we're here. We'll just put in the type of variable this is. Let's see here, numeric and numeric. Okay, great. So now I'm going to ignore that I don't have a description and then get to my graph. Okay.
All right. It froze and kicked me out, but I'm with you.
Okay.
You were just talking, and then I was like, "Oh no."
Yeah, same. All right. Okay, so now she wants 3 different graphs. I don't remember the instructions. Create 3 graphs that should tell a part of the story found in the data set, and then
she wants us to paste them into one of those breakout room slides.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you make a graph showing change over time? So time would be one of my variables, and then what kind of change are we looking for?
Right. Probably carbon dioxide, I think, would work.
That's what I'm
the
thinking.
only one that's numeric. Yeah.
Interesting that it automatically put time on the y-axis. I always think of time as the dependent variable.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I would have switched it too. Yep.
Okay, so what does this look like?
For this, we could do some other things to this too. This definitely shows change over time, but there's some ways we might enhance this visual as well.
Okay. I don't like the dot size real quick.
Shrink it. Sure. I might try adding like 2 by D, go up to 2 by D and add that as a variable, and maybe we can show that as a third piece of information on this graph. And
Okay.
then, yeah, and then click Z just like you did. So we can see that each tube is now a different color
Okay.
code.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have my babies here, and there's no way for them to ever be a part of
Of
anything
course
without
not. They
screaming.
have to be by you. Yes, my kids are slightly older, but they still exhibit those same tendencies at 7 and 9.
That's how old my boys are.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got my oldest is my son at 9 and my daughter's at 7. Yeah, and they
We've
will be
got 1 and
all
3
up in-
here.
Yeah.
All right. So I like that. It shows a clear indication of what's
Yeah.
going on.
And I might even add the connect dots too and
Okay.
see. I think that'll look. Yeah, I think that makes it
Oh,
really
I like
nice.
that.
Nice. Okay. I think this is a good one. Should we add a title or?
For the sake of time, we can just throw it in there.
Okay. All right. So let's see. We're in group 2, I believe. Oh, did it?
Oh, you know what? She's got it as view only. So
Yep.
Oh. Request edit access.
I don't. Yeah, she's just got to open the sharing section. But
Okay. Well, we have one of our, I've been taking notes in my email.
okay, cool. Yeah, you
I'll
can just
just
paste it in
Paste
there.
it there and then get it
Okay.
later. All right. Come on. Okay, here we go. All right. Good. So that was 2 by D and carbon dioxide. Maybe now sugar.
Yeah, we could look at sugar. What was one of the other challenges? Was it like comparing
Sorry. Let's
groups?
see here.
Or-
Comparison of groups.
Okay, yeah,
The next
comparing
one.
sugars would make sense then.
Comparing sugars with 2 by D then.
Well, let's see. So we have
Mhm.
sugar and 2 by D. So that's telling us the number of samples in each of those sugar types. So it's not exactly comparing. Well, it is comparing groups if the thing you want to know is number of samples.
I'm gonna look back at the table. So type, oh, okay, so type is what you were referring to
Yeah.
with the sugar. Okay, comparison.
So that's like made a matrix showing us how many of each type of sugar there were with that other category of type. So
Yeah,
like control and disaccharides and monosaccharides and water. And that's again more of a way to look at sample size across the different treatments in your experiment.
okay. Not sure exactly what I'm looking at here.
I
So-
think in this experiment, the like main response variable is that carbon dioxide parts per million.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so maybe let's compare carbon dioxide across sugar or across type. So maybe put carbon dioxide on Y. Yeah, there we go. And you can ditch the
Okay.
connect the dots for this one, but that's a good comparison of carbon dioxide across type. And then if you wanted to see what sugar looked like on X, you could flip sugar up to click X for sugar and look at comparison by sugar. So I think both of those are,
Yeah, they're similar.
yeah. And you could make type as your Z variable too, or sugar as your Z variable if you wanted to see a little bit more information that way as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, I like this.
Yeah, that's an informative graph for sure.
All right, so we've got 2 graphs. I do this with my teachers and it just takes so long to get to this point, and it's only so fast right now because I've spent so many hours on data classroom.
Well, you've learned it well. Yeah, you know what you're doing now.
Yeah. All right. So let's see here. What's the next one? The relationship between 2 variables. Oh, and then should we do a statistical analysis?
We could do that too, yeah.
Okay, so
To compare 2 or more groups.
Describe a relationship.
Yeah.
Okay, compare 2 or more groups. So this is a comparison of 2 or more groups.
Yeah, this one is for
Mhm.
sure.
Okay, so we'll do our statistical analysis.
Yeah.
Here. And we're gonna
It's
do
saying a
two-way
two-way
ANOVA.
ANOVA. I'm interested to see what happens when we click calculate here, if this,
Okay,
if we have the samples we need or not. Let's see.
so two-way ANOVA is because I have 3 variables.
Right, you have categorical X, numeric Y, and then that categorical addition. And so this you cannot run a two-way ANOVA here. And this is not a statistical problem, but this experiment is it doesn't have enough data in the combinations of the treatment. So if you just click done for a second and look at this, you need to have different combinations of each sugar with each type. And you can see here we don't. We have each type for sugar. So if you drop that Z variable and then you try a statistical test again, this should work for you.
Whoops, not appearance. All right, here we go. So this is just the ANOVA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, with the 2 variables. Okay.
And this is, yeah, that's telling us that, the CO2 variable is different across different values of sugar there, and it's highly significant. These data have some interesting distributions. One could argue that these aren't exactly a good fit for that test as well, but this is it's also a pretty robust result. I'm pretty confident that any statistical test you could run across these is going to say, yeah, that sugar does affect the carbon dioxide level. So I think this result is good.
Okay, so I'm gonna copy this to the clipboard. Just open the slide so you can now paste your graphs.
Okay.
That's convenient. All right. When I try to get to one of my tabs, the little share.
The Zoom window is blocking it.
Yep.
Yeah, it like blocks my tabs. Okay, here we go. All right, so. Let's see. Oh, no. I'm still, maybe if I reload it.
I think that did it. Yeah.
There we go.
Yep, there we go. So this is our statistic. Whoops. Let's try that again. Alrighty, so this is our test of, let's see here, which graphs. So I guess I could get that other, whoops, get that other graph that I.
You could put that one. I mean, it's yeah.
Tabs. Oh, wait a minute. Wait, nope, that's not what I want to do. So that's the problem with the, cannot create some images. No, this is also a problem that I've had where I tried to save the image somewhere else.
Oh.
Didn't work for me for whatever reason. I'm not sure why.
So copying it out of your email, it was not able to save it?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Darn. Okay. Well, let's just try that one more time. Shouldn't take too long. Now,
Unfortunately,
42 seconds.
unfortunately, I probably don't have insight for you on that copying problem because that's probably related to email.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just gonna get this one then.
That'll work.
Copy. No, stop it.
I think you have to click done down there too.
Okay. Okay. I need to get my window away from the Zoom thing. Well, if I run out of room,
Oh,
I'll
there you
get
go.
the
You
other
got
one.
it in there. I saw it.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got 2 by D and type and carbon dioxide, I think was the other one. Whoa, 2 by D is my Z variable, I thought. No, was that it? Oh, maybe that was it.
Yeah. Yeah, Angela, it was time CO2 on X and it was carbon dioxide on Y. And then we had split it out by 2 by D on Z and we did those multiple line graphs.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, we're just finishing
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, I know. Breakout room, the abruptness of it all. So I'm hoping from the look on you guys' face, everybody's still working on a graph. I love that. Everyone's very focused. Hi, David. What's your question?
I don't think we have access to the PowerPoint to upload the graphs.
I just opened it a few minutes ago. So, but you're
Okay.
right. There was no, so try to refresh and see if it'll let you in.
Oh, got it. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Sorry about that. I forgot to give you editing access. Okay, so we've gone a little bit after, and so I just want to give you guys a wrap up in case you have to leave, but you also do not need to leave. Erin and I can be here to help you out as we go. But the last thing I wanted to point out was look at the different graphs that were created. Most people are using the carbon dioxide fermentation lab data chart, and that same data chart is allowed you to produce many different graphs. That doesn't mean that every graph is a great graph, right? But we could at least do a gallery walk, a peer review of those graphs now, and start talking about the strengths and the weaknesses of different presentation styles. We can talk about the different stories being told here, because sometimes there's stories about the different types of sugars like lactose, maltose, and sometimes there's stories about monomers compared to monosaccharides compared to disaccharides, right? There are little attributes that we like. Someone just said that they like the emojis as their dots. But then there are also things like technical aspects that we might require, like a title and axis labels and units. And we want to make sure our students are catching those required aspects and then adding the elements that they enjoy in terms of readability or fun or figure captions for clarity. So in thinking about that, the last thing I want to let you guys know before if you have to go, I don't want to cut you off. If you're in the midst of this and you want to keep going, you're welcome to do that, like I said. But the last slide number 22 is a tutorial on how to use statistical analysis. So your t-test, your linear regression, these things are going to be chi-squared analysis. Those are described in these mini videos. Each video is about 2.5 minutes, and you can watch any of these videos. Once you get comfortable with the interface, you can learn how to really enhance those features. Data Classroom on the left side allows you to adapt and display only the features you want to show. So I can go to this little hamburger thing and I can go to the control feature. That control feature as a teacher lets me allow for statistical analysis or some more sophisticated aspects or not show them. So I can click these on or off, deciding if I want to allow my students to have those features. So maybe as we go through the year, I'm going to increase the features that they have access to so that they're not overwhelmed at the beginning, but later they have some of the things that they need. And then finally, I do want you to come back to how this might impact your IA scores. If you can imagine the facility that the students have to manipulate their data is going to help them understand it better, then certainly their communication about their data will be better. But knees taking a snapshot of a really nice graph that's already well constructed, that's going to bring them up regardless of how well they can communicate their analysis. So last thing, if you feel like you're a little bit rough around the edges about your own data analysis, I do a statistics class. A couple of you guys who are in here have been in my statistics classes before. I just started a January session where part 2 is happening on Thursday night. And that's the session that happens every other week. And then in March, we'll go weekly, starting all over again with part 1 through 8. And we start from the very easiest thing to the more difficult things and pair it with some techniques that you'll see in Data Classroom. If you have any questions, feel free to stay on, or you can contact Erin and I for either technical help or advice on data analysis and statistics, or just getting those skills under your belt. Everything we used tonight was in this spreadsheet, and then there's also a summary slide at the end of the resources. We did record this, and so we'll post the recording in a couple of days. You'll get an email from Erin or from me so that you can review it. But if you want to stay on and ask us specific questions about how to work this into what you're doing right now, or how to get over whatever challenge you're having as you're playing right now with your data classroom graphs, then stay on with us, and we'll be happy to play around a little bit more. Otherwise, good night if you're taking off.